You know what's strange? We talk endlessly about boomers and millennials. We dissect Gen Z like they're some fascinating new species. But there's this entire generation that just exists in the middle, barely mentioned, almost invisible. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. They're your older coworkers who never complain. Your parents who seem oddly detached sometimes. The people who built the internet but don't post about their breakfast. Soft pause. And here's what nobody tells you. Their psychology is probably the most misunderstood of any living generation. They were shaped by something no generation before or since experienced. The first mass experiment in childhood independence. Gentle. Picture this. It's 1978. You're 8 years old coming home to an empty house because both parents are working. No smartphone, no ring cameras, no way for anyone to check if you're okay. Gentle. You let yourself in, make a snack, do homework alone, and wait. Silence. That empty house did more than make them self-reliant. It drilled in the idea that actions have real consequences. Solemn. A study published in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry found that by 1984, approximately 7 million children between ages 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. Solemn. 7 million. That's not a few isolated cases, that's an entire generation learning that you can't always count on someone being there. These weren't neglected children exactly. Their parents were pioneering dual-income households, chasing the American dream that required 2 paychecks. But the psychological impact was profound. Gentle. When you're 8 years old and responsible for getting yourself home safely, letting yourself in and staying out of trouble for 3 hours until an adult appears, your brain develops differently. Gentle. You learn to scan for danger, to think ahead, to be your own safety net. Calm psychologically, this created what researchers call a high contingency environment, where actions and outcomes were directly linked without buffer time. Calm. Forget your key. You're sitting on the porch until someone comes home. Leave the stove on? The consequences are immediate and real. Silence. Your developing brain learned to predict outcomes in real time, which is why Gen X tends to think 3 steps ahead in ways that baffle younger generations. They're not pessimistic. They're realistic about cause and effect because they lived it daily from childhood. Gen X grew up watching their parents talk a big game about stability, then turn around and rack up divorce rates that peaked in the late 70s and early 80s. They saw people give their all to companies, only to get pink slips when the next round of layoffs hit. Solemn. The social contract their parents believed in, work hard, follow the rules, and life will work out, kept breaking right in front of them. Silence. So when psychologists call it defensive pessimism, Gen X just calls it being realistic. It's not cynicism exactly. Gentle. It's more like they built emotional armor early. They hope for good things but expect the rug to get pulled out because, honestly, that's what kept happening. This shows up in how they approach major life decisions. They're less likely to put all their eggs in one basket, whether it's career, relationships, or investments. They diversify instinctively because they watch too many people get blindsided by changes they never saw coming. Calm. The phrase trust but verify could have been invented for Generation X, except they skip the trust part and go straight to verify. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition from a childhood spent watching adults promise stability while delivering chaos. Calm. Here's a big reason you barely see them on social media. Gen X grew up in a time when privacy was just normal. Gentle. When you messed up as a kid, maybe a handful of people knew. And that was that. No phones recording your embarrassing moments, no viral videos turning teenage mistakes into permanent public records, just some awkward memories in a basement or parking lot that stayed there. Solemn. The idea of broadcasting your life for strangers to judge doesn't feel exciting to them. It feels dangerous. Soft pause. This isn't about not understanding technology. Many Gen Xers built the internet, wrote the code, designed the platforms everyone else uses, but they learned early that the less people know about you, the safer you are. Reverent. They watched Watergate unfold on television, They lived through the Iran-Contra scandal. They saw how quickly private information could be weaponized, how personal details could destroy lives. Silence. So they developed what researchers call information gatekeeping behaviors, carefully controlling what they reveal and to whom. Gentle. They'll share deeply with trusted friends, but remain mysterious to the broader world. Soft. It's not antisocial behavior. It's protective behavior learned in an era when privacy felt precious because it was genuinely private. Calm. Gen X basically turned irony into a shield. Crack a joke, keep things at arm's length, laugh it off before it stings. Soft pause. You can see exactly where this comes from. Solemn. They grew up in the shadow of the Cold War when teachers talked about nuclear annihilation, like it was just another weather forecast. Duck and cover drills in elementary school, as if a desk would save anyone from atomic fire. Gentle. When adults act like everything's about to end, but also insist you shouldn't worry. You learn to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously. You develop psychological flexibility, the ability to take things seriously while not taking them too seriously. Calm. This ironic distance became their superpower. It allowed them to function in an absurd world without losing their minds. They could care deeply about things while maintaining enough emotional distance to survive disappointment. Soft pause. Watch a Gen Xer navigate workplace politics or family drama. They'll engage fully but always with this slight remove, this knowing smile that says they've seen this movie before and know how it ends. Gentle. It's not cynicism, it's emotional aikido, using the world's force against itself while staying centered. Hopeful. This ironic stance served them well in careers too, allowing them to commit to projects while staying detached enough to pivot when things inevitably changed direction. Despite all this psychological armor, Gen X developed a distinctive approach to work that stands out even today. Calm, they don't talk about it. They don't post about it on LinkedIn, they just do it. This work ethic was forged early through jobs that seem almost archaic now. Paper routes at 5 in the morning, bagging groceries, working fast food registers where you calculated change in your head when the machine broke. Gentle. These weren't resume builders or character building exercises their parents arranged. They were raw introductions to the adult world where a 12-year-old could be responsible for delivering news to an entire neighborhood in all weather conditions. They learned that work had dignity not because someone told them so, but because they felt the satisfaction of earning their first paycheck through genuine effort. Silence. But here's the paradox. They watched their parents' generation get destroyed by corporate restructuring in the 80s and 90s. Solemn. So they never believed in company loyalty, but they're fiercely loyal to their own competence. They can't control whether they'll get laid off, but they can control whether they're the most valuable person in the room when layoffs happen. This created a work style that's simultaneously detached and deeply committed. Soft. They'll give everything to a project, but won't sacrifice their family life for a company that might fire them next quarter. There's this weird paradox at the core of Gen X psychology. Calm. They're simultaneously the most independent generation and the most quietly collaborative. Silence. They'll never ask for help. They've been figuring things out themselves since they were 8. But if you need help, they'll show up without drama, without posting about their good deed on social media. This comes from forming tight bonds with friends out of necessity when parents were emotionally or physically absent. Gentle Gen X friendships tend to be incredibly deep but low maintenance. They cannot speak for months, then pick up exactly where they left off. They understand that caring about someone doesn't require constant contact or public displays of affection. It requires being there when it matters. In workplace settings, this translates to being the reliable person who gets things done without needing recognition. They're not climbing corporate ladders for status. They're building competence because competence equals security. Soft pause. They respect authority that's earned through skill, not appointed through politics. If you've proven you know what you're doing, they'll follow you anywhere. If you're just someone with a fancy title making decisions without understanding the consequences, they have zero patience. Solemn. This isn't rebelliousness. It's pragmatism from watching incompetent leaders make terrible decisions their entire lives. Solemn. Let's talk about their relationship with money and security because it's been shaped by repeated economic trauma. Solemn. The youngest Gen Xers graduated college right into the dot-com bubble burst. The oldest ones were hitting their career stride when the 2008 financial crisis hit. They've been economically blindsided repeatedly, which explains why they're more likely to have multiple income streams, side hustles, and backup plans. Calm. Not because they're naturally entrepreneurial, but because they've learned viscerally that nothing lasts. Calm silence. This economic uncertainty created what researchers call financial hypervigilance, a constant awareness of economic vulnerability even when things are going well. They pay off debt aggressively, not because they're conservative, but because they've seen how quickly leveraged positions can collapse. Gentle. They're skeptical of financial advice from experts who've never lived through multiple market crashes. Gentle. They trust their own judgment more than institutional wisdom, because institutions kept failing them at crucial moments. This extends to how they think about retirement and long-term planning. They're simultaneously saving aggressively while doubting that Social Security or pension systems will exist when they need them. Soft. They're planning for multiple scenarios because they've lived through enough plot twists to know that the most likely outcome is the one nobody saw coming. Soft. Before the internet democratized information, knowledge had a different weight for Gen X. Gentle Lex. They spent hours in libraries, hunting through card catalog drawers for a single book that might contain the answer they needed. Gentle information had a physical cost. It required effort, time, and often money. And because of that, they valued what they learned differently. Cognitive psychologists describe this as deeper encoding, where information that requires effort to obtain becomes more permanently integrated into memory. Calm. This explains why many Gen Xers seem to have encyclopedic knowledge about random topics. Calmayo. They couldn't just Google something when they were curious. They had to commit to learning it properly or not at all. They become mini experts in whatever caught their interest because half-hearted research wasn't an option. Silence. They also learned to be information skeptics early. In a pre-internet world, you couldn't fact-check claims instantly. You had to develop internal bullshit detectors, learn to evaluate sources, understand bias and agenda. Reverent. When everything moved online, they brought these critical thinking skills with them. Reverent. They're less susceptible to misinformation not because they're smarter, but because they learned to question sources when questioning sources actually required work. This makes them valuable in workplace settings where information overload is common. Hopeful. They can cut through noise and find signal because they learned to do research when research was hard. Hopeful. Calm Gen X developed what you might call mechanical intelligence, an intuitive understanding of how physical systems work. When your bike chain slipped, you flipped the bike upside down, got grease on your hands, and figured it out. When the TV started flickering, you didn't call a technician. You jiggled the antenna, adjusted the rabbit ears, maybe gave the side a strategic whack. Gentle. This wasn't poverty or ignorance, it was how the world worked. Things broke, and you fixed them. This built a deep confidence in their ability to figure things out through experimentation and observation. They understand cause and effect in mechanical systems because they spent their childhoods testing theories with real consequences. Hit the TV too hard and you might break it permanently. Adjust the bike brakes wrong and you might not be able to stop. Soft pause. This hands-on problem-solving approach extends beyond mechanical systems into how they approach any complex problem. They're comfortable with trial and error because they learned early that understanding comes through doing, not just thinking. In professional settings, they're often the ones who can troubleshoot systems others find mysterious. Not because they're necessarily more technical, but because they're comfortable getting their hands dirty and learning through experimentation. They don't need perfect information to start working on a problem. They'll figure it out as they go. Now they're watching their kids grow up in a completely different world. One with helicopter parents, constant supervision, and social media documenting everything. Gentle, many Gen X parents gave their children the attention they never had. Structured activities, emotional support, involvement in every decision. Soft pause. But sometimes they worry they've made their kids too soft, too dependent, too visible. Because in the Gen X worldview, being visible means being vulnerable. They struggle with finding the balance between protection and preparation. They want their kids to be safe but also capable. Calm. They remember the pride of solving problems independently, the confidence that came from handling real responsibility, the resilience built through managing actual consequences. Soft pause. But they also remember the fear, the loneliness, the weight of responsibilities that maybe shouldn't have been on 8-year-old shoulders. Silence. So they hover between giving their kids everything they missed and preparing them for a world that might pull the rug out from under them. They're simultaneously overprotective and worried about overprotecting. Emotional. They want their children to be happy but also tough enough to handle disappointment. This creates a parenting style that's intensely devoted but emotionally complex. Loving but realistic about life's fundamental unpredictability. Calm. Gen X approaches relationships with the same defensive realism they apply to everything else. They're capable of deep love but struggle with the vulnerability it requires. Gentle. They learned early that people leave through divorce, death, job transfers, or simple life changes. So they love carefully with exit strategies built into their emotional architecture. This doesn't make them incapable of commitment. It makes them selective about where they invest their trust. Soft. They're more likely to have smaller circles of very close friends than large networks of casual acquaintances. Quality over quantity became their relationship philosophy, not by choice, but by necessity. When you can't count on adults to be consistently present, you learn to value the people who actually show up. Gentle. In romantic relationships, they often struggle with the balance between independence and intimacy. They want partnership but fear losing themselves in it. They've seen too many people lose their identity in relationships, watched too many divorces destroy families financially and emotionally. Soft pause. Calm. So they approach marriage and long-term commitment with both deep desire and careful calculation. They're romantic realists. They believe in love but also believe in prenups. They want forever but plan for the possibility of ending. Emotional. This can create tension with partners who interpret caution as lack of commitment, when it's actually the opposite. Commitment so serious they want to do it right. Calm. Gen X has a complicated relationship with authority that confuses both older and younger generations. They're not reflexively anti-authority like some stereotypes suggest, but they're deeply skeptical of unearned authority. Solemn. They lived through Watergate as children, watched the Iran-Contra scandal unfold, saw the fumbled response to the AIDS crisis. They observed incompetent leadership at the highest levels, making decisions that affected millions of lives. Gentle. This taught them to evaluate authority based on competence rather than position. They'll follow skilled leaders anywhere but have zero patience for incompetent management, regardless of fancy titles or corporate hierarchies. In workplace settings, this creates interesting dynamics. Calm. They're not trying to rebel or cause trouble. They're trying to prevent the disasters they've seen happen when incompetent people make important decisions. They ask uncomfortable questions not to be difficult, but because they've learned that someone needs to ask them. They challenge plans that seem poorly thought out because they remember when adults confidently implemented terrible ideas and everyone suffered the consequences. This makes them valuable team members, but sometimes difficult employees. Gentle. They're loyal to mission and competence, not to organizational charts. They'll work weekends for a project they believe in, but won't pretend to respect authority figures who've proven themselves incompetent. Silence. Soft. This isn't defiance, it's quality control. Here's something psychologists have noticed about Generation X that even they might not fully recognize. Calm, their incredible capability, often masks deep anxiety about depending on others. Calm research in the Journal of Adult Development shows that Gen Xers report lower levels of seeking social support during stressful periods. Not because they don't have people they could ask, but because asking feels like admitting defeat. Gentle. This self-reliance served them well as children, when asking for help often meant being told to figure it out themselves anyway. Gentle. But as adults, it can become isolating. They're the friends everyone calls in a crisis because they're competent and reliable, but they struggle to make those same calls when they're in trouble. Solemn. They've internalized the idea that needing help equals weakness, even though they'd never judge others that way. Solemn. This creates a pattern where they overfunction in relationships and work situations, taking on more than their share to maintain control and avoid vulnerability. Soft pause. They're more comfortable being the helper than the helped, the supporter rather than the supported. It's not that they don't value relationships, they do deeply. Gentle, but they've learned to show love through actions rather than words, through reliability rather than vulnerability. Gentle, they demonstrate care by being useful, which can sometimes be misinterpreted as emotional distance when it's actually a form of emotional expression. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow us every day as we explore these deep psychological patterns that shape how we understand ourselves and others. Soft pause. Gentle. The reality is that Generation X might be carrying a unique psychological burden. They're the bridge between worlds that couldn't be more different. Gentle, they remember life before the internet, but built the digital world everyone else inhabits. They understand both analog and digital thinking, individual responsibility and systemic thinking, privacy and transparency. This bridge position gives them perspective, but also isolation. Calm. They can translate between boomers and millennials, between pre-digital and post-digital mindsets, but sometimes feel fully understood by neither. Calm. They're simultaneously too cynical for younger generations and too adaptable for older ones. Too independent for a world increasingly focused on community and collaboration. Too collaborative for a world that rewards individual branding. They watch younger generations document every moment, and older generations struggle with basic technology, feeling somewhere in the middle of a cultural conversation they helped create but don't fully belong to. Silence. Solemn. This psychological position, being the translators, the bridge builders, the ones who understand multiple perspectives, is exhausting in ways that are hard to articulate. Solemn. They solve problems others can't see and navigate between worldviews others can't bridge. Gentle, and they do it quietly without fanfare, because that's what bridges do. Gentle. The truth is, Generation X might be the last generation that truly understands what it means to be alone with your thoughts, to be bored, to solve problems without Googling the answer. Gentle. They're not better than other generations, just different, shaped by a unique moment in history when the old world was dying, and the new one hadn't quite been born. Gentle. They learned to be comfortable with uncertainty because uncertainty was their constant companion. They developed resilience not as a choice, but as a survival skill. They built competence because competence was the only security that couldn't be taken away. Soft pause. Calm. And maybe that's their greatest gift to the world. This quiet competence, this ability to function without drama, to solve problems without seeking credit, to care deeply while maintaining enough distance to stay functional when everything falls apart. Calm. They're the generation that asks what could go wrong. Not because they're pessimistic, but because they've learned that someone needs to think about these things. They're the ones who have backup plans and spare keys and emergency funds, not because they're paranoid, but because they remember what it feels like when systems fail and no one comes to help. Reverent. In a world increasingly focused on visibility, personal branding, and public validation, Generation X remains quietly essential. Reverent. They're the IT person who keeps the servers running, the middle manager who actually knows how things work, the parent who shows up without posting about it, the friend who helps you move without expecting anything in return. Silence. Solemn. They're the bridge generation, and bridges don't get much attention. They're just there, doing the work, holding things together, expecting nothing in return. Solemn. And maybe that's the most Generation X thing of all, not caring if anyone notices. Soft pause. Hopeful. If this exploration resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow our channel and share this with 5 people who might see themselves in this story. Tell me in the comments, what aspect of Gen X psychology surprised you most? And what generation should we examine next? Hopeful.